demonetizing
No.
if we ever got monetized.
Yeah. That would be a cool thing. No.
To get demonetized. It's a real goal.
That'd be fun. I'd like to get demonetized. I'd
But
like to
yeah.
be monetized. And then I'd rather them say we get money and then take that money away than just be where we're at. Welcome to the Space Turtle Show. I'm your co-host Joey Garvey, and with me as always is Mr. Joshua Toe.
What's Joey just went through puberty in like the 30 seconds that intro took to say.
I have to decide, or not decide. I deceive my audience into thinking I don't have a cold.
But yeah, we're not recording at 2 a.m. Today, or we're able to put in a lot more energy, but also there might be some background noise because other people live here as well. So
Ew, fucking other people.
yeah.
Just get rid of those guys.
Okay, so this week we did The Virgin Suicides, my pick for the wholesome family and friends month of November.
This movie is oh my god. If you haven't seen this movie, it's neither family nor friend appropriate. And he lied to me.
He hyped the Hunt for the Wilder People up so much that I was like, well, I gotta have an antithesis to this joyous tone. I gotta break out the Virgin Suicides to combat this, you know?
You got to pick the darkest movie ever. This movie's dark as fuck.
Yeah, I like the underlying sense of its darkness. It's not like super like grainy and rainy like Seven, for example, you know. It's
Yeah,
it's a
no.
beautiful.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Yeah. It's true. That's true.
Quite a boring story, but I had a film class last year. I don't know. I watched every film or a film every week, and this was by far the most sleeper film in her curriculum that just like slapped me in the face. Like I didn't even pay enough attention to this film to like watch it like at home at night in the dark. Like I was just watching it on school grounds in like some desk somewhere because I needed to finish it for class right before class. And then I don't know, I just got totally encapsulated by it. And then when it ended, I just felt so empty, but also like so invigorated at the same time. And you know, it's not the type of film that I like rave over all the time. Or when people are like, "Oh, you like movies? Like, what's your like top picks and stuff like that?" Like, it's not always on the forefront of my mind, but it's always in my subconscious. I always think about this film. Sometimes it gets its time in the limelight. So
it felt like by the end of it I was tricked. Just the ending scene in general, but we won't go into that yet.
But yeah, what were your first thoughts of the film then, Joey?
I really liked this movie a lot, and I didn't actually expect to like it as much as I did because well, this movie was directed by Sofia Coppola. I'm sure you know that, but just for like if
Yeah.
someone's listening, it's directed by Sofia Coppola, her directorial debut. Not the film that's always talked about when people think about her. It's usually Lost in Translation because Bill Murray's in that one, or
Always.
The Beguiled. So I was coming in this movie and I was like, Sofia Coppola's pretty cool person, so we'll give this movie the benefit of the doubt. But I thought it was incredible. Actually, I liked it a lot more than Lost in Translation, and I mean it was very dark, but it was also very poignant. It said a lot about a lot of things that are going on for us youngins. It's a good coming of age story, even though it's very dark. It's in a lot of ways it's very true. So
I appreciated so much the type of dreamlike nature of the film. It is super dark in its subject matter, but I think the presentation of that subject matter never like made me feel depressed.
mhm.
There's like a bunch of like depressing movies which I love, like Synecdoche, New York, that just fills you with dread in like every single moment. And it's not even about like suicide or anything like that. It's just about like everyday life. But this film's about like suicide and like isolation and de-individuality, or
Mhm.
de-individualization, like big boy words
Big boy
that I can't pronounce. And
de-individuation.
yet, yeah, and yet it like presents it in such a high school homecoming dance tone. I love that about the film.
No, for sure. I mean, if you took certain scenes out of this movie, I would have thought it was a John Hughes movie, like a like Ferris Bueller or like Breakfast Club or some shit. Yeah, something like that. I mean, there's some parts of this movie that are actually genuinely funny. Like the very beginning with that kid that just falls in love with the girl. He's like, "I'm gonna jump off the roof because I love you so much." And they just show him getting out of the bush.
Yeah, he just stands
That
up and
was
just walks
so
away.
funny. I mean, I literally laughed out loud in those moments.
No, yeah, there are definitely hilarious moments, and then there's also touching moments, and I feel like all of that, just came together to just slap you in the face with some of the harsher subject matter whenever it comes up.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's great because the tone wasn't as overt as like other depressing movies, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that drew me to the movie the most is like I always like almost like approaching the harshness of life and the sadness of life with like a sense of humor type thing. And I think that kind of encapsulate. I mean, it's not the funniest movie ever, but
Do you want to get to one of your two?
my two are, let me think, directing and acting. Those are my two.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
what about yours?
Mine are writing and
Oh, nice. So we get a little bit of we get to touch on a little bit of everything because I think my
mhm.
honorable mention would have been writing, just because I think it's wonderfully adapted, or at least that's what I've heard, but I don't know enough to talk about it. So
No, neither of us have seen the book or seen the
I've
book,
seen the
goddamn.
book.
Duh.
Yeah, I mean, I've read so much stuff that they're all like, "Oh, it's a beautiful adaptation and a great adaptation in the book," and I'm like, that's probably good on the part of the writer, which is Sophia Coppola.
Oh, I didn't even know she wrote this movie also. That's
Oh,
pretty cool.
really?
No. No, I
Okay,
guess if we both have acting, maybe we should start with acting.
sure. I'm down to start with acting. Who was it that you thought was the most highlight or highlights of the film?
All right. Some highlights. Kirsten Dunst. She was my favorite performance of the movie.
Hmm.
I honestly I hadn't seen her in anything that I really loved, but in The Virgin Suicides, she was magnificent. I couldn't even take my eyes off her. Sure
Yeah,
though.
she was my favorite performance as well. And I think there's an honorable mention for Josh Hartnett who plays Trip Fontaine. I think I I think the whole point of the film with the actors was to have so many people like blend in together. So I mean, I apologize. I
Mhm.
think everyone was like did relatively well in their role, but the whole point was to have like all the sisters kind of blend together and then all the boys to kind of blend together, which is why you don't really remember any of their names, which allowed Lux and Trip to be the shining two characters.
It's not like there's a lot of big stars in this movie, even Kirsten Dunst and Josh Hartnett. It's not like those guys were very big stars at the time. It made me think that this is a real high school moment that's going on. These are like real high schoolers. I never thought for a second these are actors playing a part.
Like you said, they're kind of like low key stars, if anything. The rest of the cast, I don't even think most of them went on to play anything else, or like maybe like one or two other things. But like, been looking at some of them, and most of the children don't really go on to play that many more parts, except for Kirsten Dunst and perhaps Josh Hartnett. I haven't looked at his
I
filmography.
think he's in The Social Network.
The adult actors were like very famous people sometimes, or not maybe like A-list celebrities, but like you had like Danny DeVito.
Oh my god. They did not ask my permission before handing me Danny DeVito for one scene.
Yeah. He was just this
Why?
psychologist. Like he was
That doesn't make any sense. There's just one scene, Danny DeVito, right there.
Yeah, it really slapped me in the face. I totally forgot he was there. And I think there's one other actor. Let me look real quick at my notes. Oh, and Hayden Christensen. That's I guess one of the other
What? Wait, where was Hayden Christensen?
He
Who
was
was Hay
one of the boys that Trip, like, invited to ask the other girls out.
Oh my god, you're sh Hayden Christensen was one of those guys?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Uh, yeah, the
So
other than
glad you
that,
said
yeah.
that.
So these, like, sleeper famous people went, like, super long ago, maybe before they were famous, definitely with Hayden Christensen, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
that
think that
was
was so
pretty
amusing to see. I guess that was a fat tangent.
sorry. Just, I'm always rooting for Hayden Christensen. He gets a lot of shit for the prequels, and then I kinda like him.
He seems like a chill person.
Yeah,
But
he's just living his life.
do you have any specific scenes, or moments that really highlighted, your appreciation for their acting? Let's really think about that one.
Um, I think for me, the scene that always comes back to my head is the one with Kristen Dunst at the door, her house at the end of the movie, when she's explaining to the guys like, "All right, the girls are just getting ready. She's just smoking a cigarette," and she very casually goes to the car, and you're just like, she really sells you that nothing's going on, but when you look back, you can see like the agony in her face and how tired she is and
Mhm,
everything that's going on with her. And it's one of those moments that really was Academy Award worthy to me.
mhm.
It felt so good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's so much, like, pain, but, like, she plays it off, and she, like, kinda, like, is still, like, a little flirty, not really letting on that anything is wrong, and then, like, when she finally says bye, there's, like, when you for me, I watched it a second time, so I saw, like, there's, like, a tear in her eye when she says goodbye or bye, I don't remember exactly, and that part, I was just like, oh, that hurts so much because I know what's gonna happen. Maybe
Oh,
you weren't, like, entirely sure, perhaps you were, I don't know, but I say, like, the general audience isn't, like, entirely sure what's
no, I wasn't
going
ready.
on.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I was flat out like not, I had no clue. I mean, I thought I was like, maybe I was like, I know all the 5 of these girls killed themselves, and I know there's not a lot of time left, but I thought it would be like, I thought the parents would come out, and they'd have, like, some big, like, climactic event, but they didn't. Oh, it hurt more than a climactic event.
Yeah, I think, when you were saying at the door though too, I was thinking of the second scene, which I really, really loved Kirsten Dunst's, performance, and that's the one where she brings Trip home, and they just watch, what, the Nature Channel or something with the
Oh,
whole
yeah, that's
family,
so good.
and then he's like, well, he gets kicked out, I guess, 'cause, the parents are like, "Oh, it's getting late," and then Lux walks him out, and then she's just so I love her character. It's like, she just, like, kinda messes with him, I guess, and she's, like, super awkward, and, like, you can see the acting for Trip, by Josh during that scene was great too. I could see in his eyes that he's like, "Well, okay, now's the time for me to, like, ask her out, like, I got her alone, and everything's, like, working out perfectly," and then, like, the tone that Lux is giving him, and you can see that shift in his, like, eyes that he's like, "Okay, maybe, like, she doesn't like me. Maybe this is, like, a bad idea. I don't think I'm gonna ask her anymore." And so he's like, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna go." And then he leaves, and then and
Yeah.
then she just pops out of nowhere, and then the loud, like, oh, the soundtrack is so good too, and the song just, like, blared during that scene. I feel like that's, like, one of the climaxes of the movie, not gonna lie.
A lot of the acting to me that I thought was really good was Josh in the car right before where Kirsten Dunst comes. Just like his slow realization that she doesn't like him that much, and then all of a sudden being so surprised when she goes in the car and just starts making out with him. I think from like a directorial standpoint and an acting standpoint, the scene worked really well for me.
Yeah. And then you're just so happy for him. And then he, like, oh, I feel like it's like a trope now, like almost something to make fun of. But the whole point where he, like, pulls out the gum from his mouth afterward,
Yeah,
that's so funny. Yeah,
yeah, it
there's
was
just
kind of funny.
but yeah, the whole subtlety that the two played off of each other, it really reminded me of one of my favorite romance movies of all time, the Before series. The subtlety of Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, yeah. Yeah, the subtlety, the way that they, like, bounce off of each other, the nonverbal acting that the 2 displayed, I felt was really praiseworthy.
Those 2 were really good. I thought whoever did the acting for the parents, I liked that a lot. I was able to see the dynamic of the parents very well without them having a lot of, words spoken, just, like, sort of glares they gave.
Like you said, they don't say too much, and not even, like, their words, they're never, like, super harsh. I mean, probably the worst thing is, like,
Yeah.
the mom making Lux burn her music. Other than that, it's never, like, abusive, or anything like that. It's just the whole demeanor that they had. Like you said, the glares that they gave and that kinda stuff that really rounded the characters of the parents, out. At least the mom. Because sometimes the dad is a little bit nicer and not as strict, but Kathleen Turner, yeah, I think she did a great job, and she seems so menacing too.
No, I think what's very important is they had good performance because the shadow of the parents looming over the movie, I think was even more important than the specific scenes that they were in. Like if those performances don't work, then you don't really feel scared whenever the girls do something wrong or something like that. But you can see like the mom's performance, even because there's so I like that you brought up the nature documentary scene, like almost all of the characters are acting in that moment and you can try to pick apart every single storyline that's going on. Like you can see the parents intensity, which is very important. You can see the awkwardness between Josh and Kirsten, and you can see like the sisters looking over and seeing what's going on and trying to like put it all together. I mean, just going back to that scene, it's one of the best I think because it shows it highlights all of the acting all in one, and you know your eyes like keep moving over and over and over to see what's going on.
It was definitely one of those memorable and well-directed scene to allow the actors to
What's it called? Well directed. Oh, how I forgot the words well directed.
No, that's not what went through my head, but okay.
No, I'm just messing with
No, yeah, totally. That sounds super weird. I just abandoned my search for the big word, and I just went with the well-directed. But, yeah, like, her allowance for the actors to really bloom in the sense of the wide shots to see, like, every single one of the sisters, as well as, like, Lux and the mom and the parents and Trip and everything. I thought that was a great scene for the acting. I think
For
if we're
sure.
talking about the parents, I have one more. It's also a nonverbal scene, and it's not even just the actors. I feel like it's also directing, which is why I chose directing. The scene where Lux comes back from football field, I guess,
Mhm.
and she rides a taxi, and then she, I guess, knocks on the door or opens the door or something like that, and then her dad runs out, and then the mom runs out, and I feel like it could have been such an opportunity to display that type of terror that she's feeling by zooming in, or maybe not zooming in, but like having close-ups of her face and like
Oh,
how fearful she is, and then like the parents yelling and having dialogue to make them scary. But Sophia didn't do either of those things. She just kept it a wide shot where you could see the tree and you could see the taxi car, and it was just, there's no audio. You just watched as the parents were like pulling her inside, and like scolding her, and her body just shrank. How terrified like Lux was, or how like suppressed she was, rather than having like dialogue or having like close up shots.
Josh, I am so glad you brought that up. So fucking glad. That that shot there, best shot in the movie. That was a spicy meatball of a shot. I mean, what can I even say? I mean, you said it so well, but I mean, it's just from a wide angle, not only is it different from what you expected and different from all of the other movies that came before it. It made an impact, like, on a story level, on, like, you know, the filmmaking level. It made sense to have that shot that way. You could see everything you need to know without any words being spoken because you already knew what was going to happen, you know?
Mhm,
Everyone already knows that she's going to go home and she's going to get yelled at and everything's going to turn out this way. What we didn't know was how it was going to happen. And I
mhm.
think the execution of the scene really made more of an impact than I was expecting at the moment. And it surprised me with how they shot it.
Yeah, a directorial debut, like, wow.
Jesus, Sophia, oh my god.
But yeah, things like that were I guess we're kind of leaning into directing smoothly, I guess.
Yeah, smooth
Um,
transition. Look at
um,
us.
but yeah, like scenes like that, so many other scenes that she, I guess, this little dips into writing as well, but that Sophia adds into the film that just make it such a cohesive tone and story. For example, there's so many like shots or like audio of like the neighbors talking about the Lisbon family, especially in the early scenes. You have like a straight up shot of like two women talking about why Cecilia would try and kill herself in the very first scene of the movie.
Mhm.
And then later on, I think it's during the scene where they are taking out the fence. The shot is of the or the dads, I guess, taking out the fence, but you can hear the wives talking in the background about like I don't remember exactly what they were saying. I think they were saying that like removing the fence isn't gonna like yeah or something like that. It's just
Something along those lines, some sort of gossip.
yeah.
Or maybe
Um,
like, well, I remember one particularly poignant line was when one of them said, "Oh, that 13-year-old girl, you know, she was gonna be a crackhead. These other 4 girls are gonna be great."
that
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 one
hits
hurt
home.
me.
Yeah.
That's some
Um,
writing, but also the director's choice to show all that gossip.
but she doesn't show much of the inside of the Lisbon house. And so you don't really know, you know almost as much as like the neighbors know, like what's going on in that house, or the boys know what's going on in that house. And so like I love the fact that in the directing, she kept this tone of like there's not exactly a clear answer on like why the girls are so like unhappy. Like I never felt like the parents were painted as like a villain, like perhaps a strict parent, or one that you personally don't agree with or personally think are unfair Christian parents. But I never thought that they were like evil. And then in the very end, when the girls have killed themselves, and then the mom is moving away, she says like this house was always a house filled with love, and I'll never understand why they did it, you know? And so there were great moments that were portrayed in the house as well. Fun moments of like, for example, the mom agreed to like have a party after Cecilia tried to kill herself so that the girls could have some social interaction, you know? The girls weren't able to like blossom and stuff like that. But I think it leaves a very open question on what truly was the defining factor that caused them to commit suicide.
But, I mean, I totally get what you mean, like, the kind of camera work, they don't show a lot of, like, transition in the house, like, they don't spend a lot of time on the house itself camera-wise, like, they don't do a lot of world building in the house. I mean, you understand, like, there's the basement where the party was at, the living room where they were watching TV, and then the girls' room. But I
Yeah.
think she doesn't show you the whole house because she like you were saying, she wants to put you in the neighbor's perspective. She wants to make you seem like this house is kind of an outside house, you know?
When they're reading Cecilia's diary, and the sequence that fades from them reading it to Cecilia actually narrating and reliving these moments that she had with her sisters, and the dreamlike quality where the saturation is like turned way up,
Mhm.
and then there's like sometimes there's like Lux's face that's really like that takes up like half the screen, and it's like kind of transparent. And then like Cecilia swinging, like it just created such a dreamlike thing that almost, if it wasn't like a diary, it almost makes you think that oh, was all these good times just like a dream that Cecilia had, you know? In contrast to the ending scene where the boys go over to the Lisbon house, and then they have another dream sequence, which is an actual dream that all of the girls, like, get in their car and they're driving away, and they're,
Uh-huh.
like, laughing. Almost in that sense, in that scene, there's not any, like, camera manipulation. I mean, maybe, like, the color grading is, like, slightly higher so that there's, like, more joy in the, scene, but there's no, like, transparency or weird narrator or anything like that. Like, that contrast between this is an actual dream and the way that is shot versus this is an actual memory, or at least as far as we know, it's a memory, and how that was shot, you know?
No, for sure, and I like the way that she did it because as a director, she could have been a lot more overt with her camera work, you know? Like, Pulp Fiction already came out in 1994, and kind of the big thing for a little while after that was, the crazy, zany, stylistic kind of direction, and
Mhm.
even though, like, she made some distinct directing techniques, she was a little more, like, subversive, and she let a lot of the writing do the talking, which I thought was a really good decision in that moment. But obviously, like with some of the stuff that you were saying, she finds a way to subtly imprint her direction and the way she wants you to follow the story, but she's not overt about it, which I appreciated a lot. It reminded me a lot of American Beauty, the way that it
Oh,
was shot
yeah.
and made. I just looked up actually when American Beauty came out, and it came out the same year, which is, I think, a lot of the reason why this movie does not get the credit it deserves because American Beauty came out the same year, and I'm pretty sure that movie won Best Picture, and it got all the awards and everything, and it had Kevin Spacey in it. I mean, ew, but like at the time, very big deal. I'm glad that this movie kind of hit that new wave of like kind of twisted coming of age stories. It went on it with American Beauty.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. As soon as you said American Beauty, I was like, "Yeah," like, I don't know why, it just kinda clicked in, but the whole, like, way that they're filmed and the subject matter and everything, it really does mirror American Beauty. I actually have a couple comments on the acting, again, I guess to
Oh, we're back.
backtrack.
Oh my god. No, I'm just yeah.
I actually really, really like Cecilia, performance, even though she wasn't in it for too long. Her name is Hannah Hall. For example, in the scene where she's having her party and then they bring Joe in, you know, the,
Mhm.
um,
Special
special ed
needs
kid.
kid.
Yeah, special needs kid, and how the rest of the even the family and the people at the party, they treat him, like, nicely, in terms of a surface level, and also they treat him in a way that I see people treat, like, special needs people all the time, and, like, it doesn't really rub anyone off the wrong way, but there's always been that kind of whenever, like, a special needs person comes in and everyone gathers around, it is nice to, like, show that that person has friends, and to let them know that, like, people care about them and stuff like that. But there's also this underlying, like,
Talking down,
yeah, and, like, having fun with the person, even though, yeah, like, okay, he always guesses heads, and that's, like, fun, like, it's not, like, bad-natured or anything like that, but you kind of almost exploit that for, like, entertainment, in a sense, and then while they're doing all of that, you get a close-up on Cecilia and how she, like, views everyone else, and she doesn't say too much, or anything at all to Joe, but her performance in that maybe I'm, like, projecting a little, but her
No, no,
performance in
no.
that,
I see. Yeah, I
yeah, it
agree with
was so good. I felt like she pretty much went through that whole cycle of what I was talking about and, like, my feelings on, like, how people treat special needs people, like, just in the subtlety of her face, and then she gets off, she excuses herself, and then she jumps off the second story, so I thought that that was just so well done by her, but also just so impactful as, like, a scene and the way, like, people treat each other. Maybe it's not, like, overtly negative, like, you're not making fun of the person or anything like that, but sometimes I don't know, I feel like she sees the relationships in people and the motives that other people have, in the way that sometimes you don't really view other people as people sometimes, you know, you're kind of closed off to your own perspective.
I totally agree with that. And, just speaking of like the whole scene that happened in too, it was so surprising. Like it's another one of those moments where I just didn't see it coming, even though I should have. I should have seen it coming. I was like, oh, well, dang, she's gonna continue to have problems. But nope. Nope, she just jumped out her window and ruined my day.
Yeah, another scene I'd like to highlight is the scene where, they are like the parents are like, "Oh, we need, to have the girls, like, be more social, like, maybe that'll help them out," and stuff like that. So they invite this kid named Peter over, and he's just eating dinner with them, and then Lux is,
Oh
like,
my
flirting
god,
with her.
that was so weird. Oh,
And the way he treats the girls, I feel like this is one of the themes. He, like, when he, like, asks to go to the restroom, and he just, like, goes through their stuff, and he looks at their perfume, and he treats them as, like, animals, not, like, in the sense, like, that he's talking down or anything like that, but just, like, something to look at and something to be like, "This is so interesting." Like, not as people, but he views them as, like, objects or, like, a source of mystery and stuff like that, and the way that his acting was pretty good in that scene, and Lux's acting is pretty good. But also, yeah, the whole construction of that scene to show and to reinforce that whole theme in the film of like, you know, the neighbors or like the boys, they just watch the Lisbon family from afar. They don't really know too much. And we as an audience don't know too much. And honestly, we're curious like the film's drive is our curiosity for the Lisbon family and the Lisbon girls, you know? So in a sense, the film kinda just forces us to, like, become the thing that it is, like, pointing out
uh-huh.
against, you know?
That actually brings me in something into the writing. One of the best things I thought about this movie was it was a very progressive case study on the effects of benevolent sexism. Um,
Mhm.
you know what benevolent sexism is, right?
Totally, but I think you should explain it just in case.
Let me mansplain it to you. Some feminism theory. So there's two kinds of sexism. I mean, it's obviously more complicated than that, but like two
Mhm,
kinds being there's one that's hostile sexism, which is the idea that women aren't as capable as men, whether like, she's a woman, she can't get good grades, or
mhm,
she's not, strong enough or fast enough or something like that.
mhm,
And then benevolent sexism is a much more complicated area of sexism, which I think is more interesting. And it's it's the idea of sexism that like women are pure, women are better, and we should do everything we can to protect them.
mhm,
This movie is all about that. They
mhm,
have these girls and the parents. I like what you said. They're not evil parents. I think the movie's not trying to say that the parents are. I think it's trying to kind of display a more systematic thing that happens in a lot of households where parents try to overly protect daughters,
uh-huh,
or like they try to restrict their freedoms because of like the effects of benevolent sexism, which
yeah,
I really responded to. I mean, it was really progressive for its time, but also it was very much of its time because this was
uh-huh.
around the time when A Handmaid's Tale came out, and there was a lot of great feminism theory going on in the 90s. But it was nice to see a movie like this tackle benevolent sexism in a way that I don't think I've ever seen in a movie.
Later on when we talk about kind of like the themes and the causes, it's really interesting the way that you see that benevolent sexism in, and I totally agree. And I was reading up on some other people and their views on the film just to kind of get more rounded experience of
Uh
it.
huh.
And yeah, they were talking about that too. So yeah, the way that she displays these themes, it never lost its narrative. It always still felt like a story about some girls and about high school and about the youth and growing up, and yet it slips in all these like super complex themes that I love so much.
Well, the problem for me is a lot of the things we talked about with acting and directing. really the writing was so good in them also, you know?
Uh-huh, that is true. Everything really came together. Like, it's really hard to pick out a scene that only highlights acting or, like, only highlights directing.
It's cool because it's not like there were a lot of words spoken and there wasn't very zippy dialogue. A
Mhm.
lot of the scenes were very awkward, you know? Or like
Uh-huh.
this scene you're talking about, or the documentary scene. Every time it feels like there's an intruder coming into the house, you're always able to get that very definitive, like, this isn't the way things are supposed to be. But
Mhm.
there's just little dialogue things like when Josh Hartnett is talking to the dad about trying to convince him to ask out his to go out with his daughter. You know, I think there's a lot of little things in the dialogue, and of course the acting as well. But you can really feel the characters, and you can understand everything that's going on. A lot of the stuff with writing, I think, is thematic that I really enjoy, but I thought the dialogue was underrated.
Yeah. No, there's a couple scenes that I think highlight a lot of the writing. For example, when the priest come and he's like, "I wanted you to know that I listed Cecilia's death as an accident." Like,
Oh,
I
that
think
fucking
that
hurt.
yeah, I think that is one line where it's just like,
Oh,
wow.
no. Making me cringe in real time.
That and, like, there's also this one scene, I think this is a little bit more debatable, I'd say, but when the father, comes into the house and talks to the dad a little bit, and he's like, "Where's the mom?" And the dad is like, "Oh, I think she's not feeling too well." And then when the father's just about to go upstairs to go investigate, I guess, or talk to the daughters or something like that, the dad, Mr. Lisbon, calls the father, and then as soon as like he turns around, Mr. Lisbon kind of like freezes up and then just like is like, "Oh, like this game, I was just talking about like whatever game he was watching." And I was just wondering like at that moment when I was watching that scene, I was like, is this like a sign that he and everyone in the family kind of has like issues and they're like kind of calling for help, but no one ever really goes through with it?
Oh, no, that I'm so glad you brought up that. I'm so glad I mean, I'm so glad you are so good at bringing up these scenes because I go through once and I kind of I attach myself to, like, the very general aspects, and then but you're really good at just picking apart very individual stuff, and then you say something, I'm like, "Oh my god, that scene," and then you're like, "Yeah, but this scene," I'm like, "Oh my god."
My whole mentality is to think of like specific examples because I always feel like whenever I have like a general love for things, I always have to try and defend them, which is kind of bad. But so I always have I have
Uh,
general like ideas of the film, but I want to have like examples to like back up what I'm saying, especially on the internet.
for sure. No, I mean, and that scene you said in particular though, I love that moment. He tries to call out to the priest and you just really wonder what's going on in his head because at that point in the movie, you you don't know a lot yet about the dad, you know?
Hmm.
Because I mean, I think it was like 20 or 30 minutes into the movie when that happens.
Yeah, it's right after
Something
Cecilia
around
died.
that. Yeah. So you don't know everything about the dad yet. And even when you go back, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, obviously he's looking for a solace because his daughter just died.
Hmm.
But I mean, like the questions he's kind of asking, you can see everything there just by him kind of reaching out for just a second. So I love that you brought that up.
I feel like that's generally the case with the whole film. All the people that have issues, they just aren't able to find someone that they can confide in almost. And I think in the writing especially, you get to see that whole progression in Lux because she kind of in a sense finds someone or some semblance of like a person she's able to relate with or experience things with, and then that person just fucking gets up and just walks away after she fell asleep after they fell asleep on the football field, and then that just destroys her.
For sure. I think it's very interesting because you notice that that's a theme throughout the entire movie. But
Hmm.
what's the kind of the interesting thing is when like you see that the parents do that individually. They kind of step back, they don't really ask for help. But also, like, as parents, their response to things is to separate, like, not ask for help, but like keep everything inside,
Mhm.
whether it be like their thoughts or like literally the physical family. Like
Mhm.
when they see something going wrong, they want to keep everything together and not really talk about anything, which it was nice to see kind of that internal external conflict mirror each other in that way.
Another highlight in the writing I felt was when they are first starting to read Cecilia's diary, but they start to, like, diagnose her, you know? The
Uh-huh.
boys, like, talk about how she's, like that whole internal, external theme that you're talking about within the family, I think also kind of is shown through the neighbors and the boys as well. They want to look internal into the family, but really they all people only have like so much information. So they're always like on the outside, but they
Hmm.
kind of try and in a bad sense, like it's not bad to try and understand people even though you're never going to be the same person, you know. But
Yeah.
at the same time, there's also this kind of danger in like thinking that you know more about people than you like they started reading Cecilia's diary and they started like diagnosing her about why she did it, and they talk about how she probably didn't even know what she was doing. And one of the quotes is like, "When she jumped, she probably thought she was flying." The whole danger of that, like external, internal versus like when you're talking about the family, it's like internal, like within the family, and then internal within themselves. This is like the dynamic between the external world and then like other people's internal, you know?
It was an important message, it seemed like, to Sofia Coppola, to show everyone doing things poorly, but to not show them in a poor light. Like, it was a very truthful light when they were saying, like you said, when they were making assumptions about the way she was feeling. I'm pretty sure they were wrong, very wrong.
Yeah.
Um, I think it shows something about the entire neighborhood, and I think that's a good reason why she showed more than just the guys in that room gossiping about, like, that family. Like, she was showing everyone in that neighborhood was talking about that family. It was weird because it seemed like they were kind of shooting bit of it documentary style, because they had, like, the interviews and everything. It honestly
Oh,
it
yeah.
made me think of Interstellar a little bit. Um
Yeah.
Just because we saw the movie last week, but, like, everyone being nosy and everyone wanting to talk about the problems about a certain other family and then not acknowledge the problems that they have themselves. I
Mhm.
think that's a very common theme with a lot of, like, those suburban movies, and I thought it was done very well here.
I think another scene that really highlights that was the news anchor, Lydia Pearl.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
oh,
And the way she kind of like the questions she asked, like the writing of that, like when she comes up and she asks like the girls questions, like did she have any hobbies? You can physically see like her making assumptions and like putting together this story that she's gonna present on the news when she knows what like she interviewed them for like what like 30 seconds 45 seconds,
yeah.
and they answered like two questions, and then yet she's gonna take those two questions and then she's gonna build a whole narrative of this family.
I think about the writing so much in that scene because I think the 2 questions she asked, she's like, "What were her hobbies?" And then, "Why did she kill herself?"
Talk
Which was
about from
so
0 to
great because
100.
she expected the mother and she expected to start with that question, I'm sure. She expected to start with the second question. She sees the daughters and she's like, "Well, I at least have to pretend to be nice and, like,
Uh-huh.
try to lure him in." But it was so lazy. Like, you could tell she
Hmm.
didn't care at all, even
Hmm.
though she wanted to pretend to care. And it showed her on the screen, like, 30 seconds later, pretending to be heartfelt and everything. But you could see from the interview immediately, like, she couldn't care less about this family or this girl. She
Hmm.
just wanted to get a story.
Yeah, I think there are a couple like one liners that are great. We already mentioned I wanted you to know that I listed Cecilia's death as an accident. There's also this other one that I wrote down. I'm actually kind of blanking on, like, the whole context of it, but it just says, "Don't worry, they took the fence out." And, like, I'm not exactly 100% sure on the context, but I can imagine, like, it's probably some conversation.
It was, the dad saw the younger girl, and then he turned to the window that was open, and then he turned back, and it was his other daughter, and she said, "Don't
Uh
worry, the fence is gone."
the way that, like, portrays the theme so much, like, they don't like, almost kind of sad, but, like, almost the parents only care about not, like not only, but, like, their focus is about, like, "Oh, I don't want my children to, like, kill themselves." Maybe not even because of, like, the public, like, societal, like, the people peering in on them. Maybe they do have some altruistic feelings, and love that they don't want their children to kill themselves, but they also don't look to understand what problems the girls have either. And that
Mhm.
whole line that that one daughter said to him just like flamed the shit out of him. Yeah, like, don't worry, I'm not gonna kill myself. Well, I can't kill myself through jumping out that window because they took the fence out, but I've got like 1,000 issues that you would never sit down and talk to me about, or like care to understand.
Yeah, all they were interested in was trying to protect them, and I think that goes back to the benevolent sexism so well, as, like, they're trying to protect them from themselves, but ultimately, the irony of it is that's what kills them. Hey, we're just a couple of fools trying to learn a little something.
Mhm. I think some of the writing in whenever Cecile does kill herself and then the girls go back to school and the way that everyone tries to like quote unquote be sensitive, that one scene where the girl talks about like death or something like that, and then the other girl just nudges her and then she's like and then they see one of the sisters sitting at the table or with the group with them and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like, first of all, like, you're just talking about death, like, what does that have anything to do with, like, Celia's suicide? And then just the whole fact that you, like,
Oh.
backtrack,
Oh, ugh.
like, you just raise it up even higher. Sorry, I didn't mean that, like, you just putting Cecilia's suicide, like, even more in the forefront, because of that whole, like, backtracking and being like, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad?"
Now that I look back at the movie, they have so many cringe moments. Just, like, you just know for sure, like, how could you possibly think to say that? But, like, I could see it, like, happening, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, life is
that
cringy.
that shit could happen. The amount of ignorance it takes to be like, "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean because your sister died." She didn't actually say that, but I mean, she might as well have.
Yeah.
And obviously the sister gave the only response that she possibly could was to just look up and awkwardly smile at her, which is exactly what I would do. I'd be like, "What the fuck?"
But it's almost kinda sad because, like, every other student, like, tries to, like, befriend them. I love that subtlety that is accentuated here that mirrors the, special needs kid. It's like all these people are doing things that are, like, quote, unquote, "nice." Like, it's not a bad thing to, like, introduce yourself or, like, to reach out to the sisters, but at the same time, there is this kind of underlying, like, negative aspect of those actions, like, by reaching out and being nice now of all times, it almost puts this fakeness on it. And
Mhm.
it was almost the saddest whenever Chase tried to introduce himself,
Oh, yeah.
one of the boys, and I honestly felt like there was no ill will in his actions, and I felt like he really wanted to get to know, I think it was the oldest sister, and yet because it happened in this time, she was, like, distrusting of his, motives, and she told him, like, "Yeah, I know who
She
you
shut
are.
him down.
Yeah, I know who you are. I've gone here all my" and then he just like, feels bad, man.
No, yeah, I think that's a good point you bring up because it's almost like everyone being nice and sensitive them. It's like its own form of ostracism.
Uh-huh.
It's not a negative ostracism, but it's more like a sympathetic ostracism, but it still makes them all feel so lonely nonetheless, you know? It's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, they're different because they're, um, because their sister died. So we have to treat them differently. And they're
Mhm.
almost asking for a return to normalcy, but they can't get it.
Mhm.
Um, which is
And I
just
think
another, it makes me sad.
it just displays this so like minefield of how life is, you know, like you want to be nice, but when you're nice, like is that like treating them differently because of what happened? Like you want to reach out, but is reaching out like saying that you think they have like struggling with something? You know, like there's just so many complexities, and I feel like movies generally like they have these people that do bad things because they're bad things, but in here they're doing nice things, and they're doing things that society even now tells you like that's fine, that's a good thing, you're reaching out to them, like they're probably struggling and stuff like that. And at the same time perhaps maybe that's not the best thing to do, you know.
I like the complication in this movie because it's not like there's a real bad guy in this movie. There's just a lot of good-willed people who
Go about it their own way. I think one of my favorite scenes is this is kind of like directing, editing, when are you feeling bad seminar type thing. But yeah, and then like the green papers that they handed out, because green is happy but not too happy, better than red. Oh, that's such a good line.
that is a good line.
And then they started listing signs to look out for, like are the person's pupils dilating, had they lost interest, and every single time like a sign would be listed out, like it would just zoom in on Lux, and then it would zoom in some more, then zoom in some more. So like yet they're listing all these signs, and nobody ever asked Lux anything. Like you went through this whole seminar, you're pointing out all the signs to look out for, which are all in Lux, and no adult ever says anything, or none of the students ever ask about how she feels or bring her up to like higher authority or anything like that, you know.
During the seminar, you could tell, like, as as announcements were going on and everything was happening, you knew everyone was looking at them, you know? Like,
Hmm.
you could tell they knew it. You knew everyone else was, how everyone was feeling about the situation. And you could see, like, just another example of the ostracization, how no one's asking how they're doing, but everyone is interested in how they're doing. They're like circus freaks.
Whenever gets to ask Lux out, and then the girls ask like, "Oh, who are we going with?" And then the dad's like, "Oh, he's gonna bring a couple of his friends." And then one of the sisters is like, "They'll auction us off." And then when the narrator talks about the girls picking their dresses and picking their fabrics, and he's talking about how like how no matter how different the fabric and the patterns that the girls choose, the mom adds an inch to the bust and like 2 inches to the waist or something like that. And so they all turned out as the same sacks. I'm like, Jesus, that's such a flame.
It is such a flame, but at the same time, like, they're totally right every time.
True.
They see right through a lot of this stuff, which I think is a lot of the reason why they have all of these mental issues from the beginning.
Hmm.
I mean, other than, I mean, the obvious, but, why they're so impacted as well, and why they all kill themselves, what their parents are doing, like the de-individuation, when they all get the same dress, stuff like that. They can just, it's very plain to them, and they can understand how they're being objectified, even if it's in like a positive light or like a goodwill. It's still like they can see themselves being objectified and they can see themselves being ostracized. A lot of the sisters have like 4 lines, maybe 4 or 5 lines,
Hmm.
but you already have a sense of how they're feeling.
What do you think the whole theme of the film is itself, or like what's the prevailing theme? Simultaneously, this is the reason, in my opinion, why the girls were pushed over the edge, and the prevailing theme of the film is what you were saying earlier, that de-individualization, the casting choice, the writing, the directing, all that kind of blended the boys and the Lisbon sisters together, and was all deliberate in the sense that like you don't really remember any of the boys' names, or any of the sisters' names, even though they are displayed to you very in your face in the beginning of the movie. They meet every sister and they like put her name like in writing, like on a freeze frame. So I think for me they're pushing this type of or Sophia is pushing this type of a person's need to be an individual and to be who they are and not part of something else entirely. Like the way the girls all have like the same dress pretty much in the end, how the parents barely even treat them as like a single person. They treat them as like a group. They punish them as a group. And Lux's whole storyline is that she's like the one sister that we're given the chance to focus on, and her whole struggle to be an individual. And so like she starts off, she's like the flirty one, so that's like her thing. And then she finds like Trip and everything, and then he like rips her heart out. And then as a punishment, her mom made her like destroy her rock albums. And then I feel like that descended her more into the sense of de-individuality, or
Yeah, she was the one kind of speaking out, and she kind of got banged into obedience.
being the one that bangs a lot of guys on top of the roof, and how that becomes her new identity. Even when it's a bad identity, you kind of always want to seek to have your own identity. That kind of just led.
No, yeah, I can totally see that. I actually disagree a little bit on the theme, or the main theme, I guess, because I consider that to be one of the themes, but for me, the main theme is it's a very feminist story to me.
Mhm.
And I think it has to do a lot with how benevolent sexism can be detrimental, and how um in on a societal fashion it can destroy the lives of a lot of these girls that were growing up in a very that had a lot of prospects. And so for me, I thought that was kind of the main theme of it, but I could totally see de-individuation, because that was a very prevalent message too. I mean, obviously films are allowed to have more than one theme, so maybe we're just arguing semantics, but
The whole last line where like, oh, we were in love with them, and like that kind of stuff. I just blanked on the word. Big words. Misogynistic, yeah. There's this
oh,
like
I thought you were gonna
misogynistic.
say well directed.
Damn, why you gotta flame me like that?
I'm sorry, I'm in a flaming mood tonight.
uh, I think the theme of de-individuality, but I think that's the one I took out the most, and I think that kind of like shows me a little bit more about who I am as a person. And then there's like your theme, which is probably the one that Sophia Coppola is going for. And then I think the misogynistic, manic pixie ignorance of men. I think from what I've read, I haven't read the book, but from what I read, I think that was the theme that was most prevalent in the book. And how like we all debate about this type of stuff. I mean, mine is less of a debate since it's personal opinion, but but how like she was able to make a film that just talked about all this stuff so much that like I took something different from it and you took something different from it. Although we all like kind of agree on each other, we're talking about like
Yeah.
the most prevalent theme that we found in the film, and it's all kind of different for us.
And I'm sure if we were all women, we'd see the movie a lot differently too.
Yeah. Damn it, we're all men.
We're just ignorant
Makes
men.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's it's one of those movies, its themes go beyond the movie. It's just one of those movies that is very topical, and it's still topical today, even though it came out 20 years ago now.
So, were there any stuff that you didn't like in the film?
I didn't even think about that until just now.
Don't worry, I'm not any more well planned for this than you are.
Actually, I can't think of much at all. Do you have anything that either you didn't like or maybe confused you?
The ambiguity in this film in the ending is that like you do not have enough information to understand why the girls did what they did. And in a sense that mirrors real life, where like if someone took their own life, you will really never truly understand fully why they did it, what caused them to do it, what was going on in their life, what was going on in their minds. And I like ambiguity in the sense that like find one out for yourself, and that kind of tells you a little bit about who you are. But in this film, I felt like and it's part of the theme. So like it's not, like I said, an objective negative, but the answer to that is that there is no answer and that you will never have an answer. So it's not like I can just think about the movie for 100 hours and then like come up with my own answer on why. No one will ever know why a person kills themselves, truly. That type of ambiguity. Oh, it's not bad. I like it. It's just so hard to I just sit there and I'm like, "Ugh, I'll never know." Ugh.
I can see that. I still couldn't think of any negatives.
I think maybe I haven't watched it enough times. I mean, only twice, right? Nub numbers. In the end, we had pieces of the puzzle, but no matter how we put them together, gaps remained. Oddly shaped emptiness mapped by what surrounded them, like countries we couldn't name. What lingered after them was not life, but the most trivial list of mundane facts. A clock ticking on the wall, a room dim at noon, the outrageousness of a human being thinking only of herself. And that's such a good line. That's so good writing. What?
Wow, that's beautiful. And no one quotes that ever. I've never heard that
Yeah.
quote in my life. If you like what you heard here, you can give us a subscribe. Hopefully, you like this video. Give us a like, give us a comment, anything you prefer. And we hope to see you guys next time.